Hi, I'm Dr. David Dobson. Welcome to Conversations. Today, we dive deep into a massive corporate blind spot. While multinational enterprises send top executives abroad, the expectation is flawless excellence. But here's a reality check. Up to 70% of those international assignments underperform or end entirely. And the root cause is in the lack of business acumen. It is the immense psychological strain placed on the expatriates and their accompanying spouses as they try to adjust to their new lives. The majority of the multinational corporations completely overlook formal mental health supports. To help us unpack this corporate blind spot and discuss how to fix it, joining us today is Dr. Donna Derksen. Donna is an assistant professor in human resources and organizational studies at the University of the Fraser Valley, and she recently completed her PhD at the Australian Institute of Business. Her research looks at exactly how multinational enterprises handle or fail to handle the mental health of the global workforce. Donna, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, David. As I've mentioned before, I feel like this is a rite of passage as I have become Dr. Donna. So thank you so much for having me.
Donna, when multinational companies choose executives for international assignments, they pick their top talent. But the choice seems to create a pressure cooker environment. Why is there an assumption in HR that being an excellent leader at headquarters automatically means you will have a seamless psychological adjustment abroad?
David, what a fantastic question. And I have to applaud you for when you were introducing my subject topic, you referred to it as psychological strain. And I think one of the reasons that it is misconfused and people think that if somebody is working at the home country at the executive level, that it would naturally automatically mean they could perform the same job is because they think of things in terms of if somebody just adjusts to their local environment, everything will be the same. But that adjustment is perceived, there's challenges to how we theoretically and then operationalize the term adjustment because it suggests a temporal movement of time that can be addressed solely by cultural supports or things like that. And so you get this experience of people of everybody not understanding that people come with their strains that they already have and then they move into this. And they're also navigating an entirely new system that changes the actual work. So you're not actually doing the same role as you would do in the home country.
Donna, the statistics in your research are staggering. Up to 70% of these assignments underperform or fail entirely, and it
Mhm.
leads to a massive family strain, like high divorce rates. Yet, half of these executives get zero pre departure training, and mental health is completely left out of the conversation. Why have traditional HR practices historically treated psychological struggle as just a byproduct of cultural adjustment instead of dealing with actual mental health?
David, that is such a complex topic. And so first I want to reiterate what you've talked about is that according to Dang et al. In 2022, again, 50% of expatriates have early return. So they do not stay at their international assignment. And then 70% of them on 70% of those that remain underperform.
Mhm.
And the two major reasons, when you look at that, what the research shows, again from Dang et al., is that it is because of the lack of adjustment from the family side or the expatriates itself. So when you address that topic, all things should be addressed. All things should start to help. But one of the reasons you can't really organizations aren't to blame at first because
Mhm.
they're following the research and they're following what we've talked about in research and the empirical information and the theoretical. And there's sort of three components to why it is non-existent right now. And in my actual research, when we go into what my actual research study found, there was no mental health supports. Nobody identified that they received mental health supports specific to their international assignment. If they received them, they received them as part of any other EAP program. So whether they were wherever they were living, whatever role they had an EAP program that they could secure from that. But there's sort of three reasons for it. One of them being conceptual is the concept of psychological adjustment it's ambiguous. So when we talk about psychological adjustment, it's very ambiguous in the theoretical discussion as well as the empirical discussion. So what are you actually measuring when people are doing these tests? So it gets confused. Hippler et al. Talked about it being both ambiguous in scope and in definition. And so there's sort of three terms that get confused. And one is psychological adjustment, one is cultural adjustment, and then one is international adjustment. So these phrases have never been conceptually defined fully, and then they are interspersed. And so it's really difficult to measure success and then inform organizations how to implement success when you're measuring something that's ambiguous in definition.
Donna, your study involved 30 interviews with different participants, including accompanying spouses and external mobility providers. Why was it so important for your research to include the voices of spouses and mobility providers alongside the executives themselves to understand this ecosystem?
Such a great question. So Takeuchi et al., various studies of Takeuchi and his research partners really highlighted in about the mid 2000s. I don't have the exact date right in front of me. They really highlighted that expatriate psychological adjustment and family adjustment, any adjustment on the family was researched to the benefit of the company or the expat, meaning they weren't interested in the family's experience to support the family. It was, if we can make the spouse and the children okay, then the expat will perform. So it really had this lens of being expat specific. And so this research really wanted to understand the family's experience, the spouse, the partner who came. And my research had a really good mix of spouses being male or female, how their families experienced from the beginning when they heard that this was going to be the opportunity to when they eventually either stayed or left, because some had left and some were still in either their first or second assignment. So we wanted to know what the families needed for their own well-being, not the performance of the expat. As for the external global mobility partners, they are the ones that actually end up, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the research, which I had a concept of, but then the research confirmed it. Those external global mobility partners were actually the ones, no matter what services they were providing, that had an insight into the experiences of the family, that the corporate, they would feel more comfortable talking to these external partners than their actual company, the people within their company. So they had a lens to this conversation through dealing with multiple families and seeing consistent patterns of what was happening out there on the field.
I'm just curious, Donna. I mean, this is such an interesting topic, and I think it's one of the few studies which I have really come across where you are really studying these expatriates. Where do you get this idea that you want to study this particular group of people?
That, again, such a great question. So I will say, I have a wonderful supervisory team, and they were the ones that directed me towards the expat experience. What I am really interested in is mental health and neurodiversity in workplace settings. And so the core elements of what can we do to support people either with mental health or neurodiverse issues within workplace settings? What unique supports do they need? What unique work environments are they doing? And my supervisors, who all had international experience and who were all expats themselves, but in academic setting, said,
mm,
do some exploration and see if this is of interest to you. And when I got into this
mm,
work, it was so fascinating for me. And it really, when you get to the results, what fascinated me about it is one of the key results that came up, which was personality as proxy, was you think the people that have the most power, the most, sort of elite financial support, are living this global life, have what appears to
mm,
be everything that you could ask for in your career.
mm,
If they were struggling,
mm,
everybody is struggling. And so that's really what led me to this unique group of people. And then when I met them, they were just all the loveliest,
mm,
loveliest people, like this environment. And it's a very, for an international scope, it's actually a very small world.
mm.
So everybody knows each other. It's a very small area of human resource management. So it was just when I got to know them, I really got to love them, I guess would be one of the answers.
That's awesome, Donna. Donna, in your research, you found a near universal absence of formal mental health support. But what's interesting is how normalized this lack of care is by everyone involved. You discovered a powerful mechanism you call personality as proxy. Can you explain how that works and how it makes psychological strain completely invisible?
Absolutely. So I'm going to go back to one of our earlier conversations when we were talking about how is this hidden, and I talked about the ambiguousness of psychological adjustment. And so when you look at the fields of neuroscience or say psychology, those fields have done a really good they've done a really good job of delineating what is personality and what is mental health. And so Busher Sakiko in 2019 speak about that. That has not translated into the international assignment discussion. And I'll give you an example. In 2024, Elamine and Cascon Pereira um, did research, and they were talking in terms of psychological adjustment, and that what's really needed for expatriates to be successful is motivation, competency, and self-efficacy. Those are components of good mental health. So we haven't delineated those two components within the business world. So we mistake, somebody's personality, their ability to be resilient. We consider it personality, but those things also align with mental health, with concepts within mental health, which is mental health is also ambiguous in the sense that we don't ever define mental health by what's there. We define it by what's missing. So you have these two elements. But also, we weren't talking about mental health when the core theories that came up on psychological adjustment, mental health was not discussed in the workforce. It's only been in the last decade where people are starting to even have that conversation in the workforce. So it makes complete sense that it's missing. It's not because people were unwilling to have the conversation. The conversation just didn't exist in any workforce, even 10 years ago. So that's that's a core reason. So everybody just says we're going to hire somebody resilient. And then somebody gets hired and they think, I can't tell anyone I'm struggling, so I can take care of this myself because I'm resilient. And you get this chicken and the egg, you get this conceptual loop that goes round and round. If nobody talks about it and everybody just assumes the responsibility is on the expat, then all will be well. So it's just an invisible dialogue.
Yeah, yeah, pretty sad. Uh, Donna, because human resource departments often mix up a resilient personality with actual mental health, they miss the warning signs entirely. You argue that mental health must become a strategic priority across the entire assignment. Can you walk us through the three-tiered support system and policy roadmap you developed to help HR teams put this into practice?
Absolutely. So one of the things we realized is, and I first want to backtrack a little bit. And I was very fortunate and very much a chicken and the egg environment. I had the opportunity to create a conceptual model along with my supervisors that was published in 2024 that positioned mental health supports as a sort of superlative antecedent to all others, and that it should be included. And through that, one of the areas that we identified then was the need for customized supports. So dependent on the family environment, depending on the dynamic of how old the children are, what are the children's services, is the spouse working, are they not, do they need additional, what do they need? What does making them resilient look like for them? And so I was able to test that model and then make further refinements to that model in this thesis. And one of the things that came up was to have an understanding of co-creation of supports in general, both at the pre-departure and the post-arrival. Those are the two main time frames that within Expatriate's psychological adjustment are defined. And that was the work of Black, Mendenhall, and O'Doul in 1991. And so from that, what we realized, not every expat needs the same level of supports. So you want to make sure you're keeping a really good return on investment. So we looked at creating a 3-tiered support system where you have a baseline of supports, where mental health supports are recognized and not problematic for an expat or their family to access and are confidential. But then you need targeted support. So you're working with the family, you're co-designing, what do you targeted specifically. So let's take, for example, say you are a young family and your child was diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety in grade 4, and they're now moving to a different country in grade 6. They may need a targeted solution. And then there may be moments in time where you need intensive solutions. So is there upheaval in the environment that you are? And again, schizophrenia often displays in teenagers 17 and 18. So you're on an assignment, you're in year 3, and all of a sudden your teenager is displaying these. So you need intensive care. So you have this 3 levels of support that people may not need to have all of them, or they might not need to have them all at the same time, but they're available. And then you would also customize it based on the role and the structure in the IA context. So the international assignment context. So for example, if you are in a country that their culture does not recognize mental health as a physical illness, you may need to have privatized support because it's not accessible through hospitals. So the context of the country is really important. So those are the type of things that one of the ways that we took a look at it, that I took a look at it. But it was originally identified in the Derksen et al. Model.
Donna, your work built directly on the post-COVID expatriate mental health framework. As we look to the future, how did the pandemic fundamentally shift international assignments? And what is your ultimate hope for how this framework changes corporate culture moving forward?
That there is a mixed debate on that. When I was talking with the participants, what I heard on the ground is that it has significantly changed length of term of international assignment or where you went on international assignment, etc. But when I looked at the research, particularly Ridgway and Langmuir in 2023, it is still continuing to multinational corporations are increasingly working with international assignments. So it's definitely an area that I identified as needing more research, because what I was hearing on the ground versus what I'm hearing in the research are slightly different. But I would say I was not surprised when I found out that absolutely no accompanying spouse said they had mental health supports. One expat said they received mental health supports, but their supports, when you dug deeper, was because they had a nice manager. So it wasn't formal. It was they perceived their manager as a mental health support. But what was interesting to me when I asked, how does COVID-19 influence your perception of your psychological adjustment? It was much more of a varied response, and I thought it would have been as unequivocal as the first as what mental health supports. But some people said it was neutral, some people said it was a negative experience, others it didn't apply, but it was not, nobody said it was positive, but there was far
Mm,
more neutral
mm,
than I anticipated.
mm,
None of that was because of supports that were provided. It was more the context of where they were located. So, for instance, somebody was located in Texas. Well, Texas stayed closed for 2 weeks.
mm,
So they had a very different experience.
mm,
Or again, for somebody who kept saying, I can handle this myself, like there was one person that was just like, held at gunpoint and just thought, well, I can get myself out of here. That person also thought, yeah, COVID, nothing. So it was so contextual, but it did surprise me that it wasn't across the board that COVID was a negative experience. So
mm,
some people identified it as neutral, some
mm.
participants.
Very interesting. Donna, now that you have completed your PhD, congratulations. What is next for you?
Well, interesting in my research and this directly comes from this, and I talk about the ambiguity of psychological adjustment and mental health. And I talk about the ambiguity of cultural adjustment and psychological adjustment. The other thing that came up over and over again was when I talked about mental health, participants talked about neurodiversity.
Mm,
So
mm,
they would go, "Oh, my child has ADHD,"
mm,
or the spouse would say, I know my husband won't tell you this, but he's autistic. And then
mm,
that husband would say, I know my wife won't tell you this, but she's ADHD. So I asked about mental health, and more often than not, people would talk about their neurodiversity that again, they still kept hidden from
mm,
their organizations. And so a lot of my
mm,
research that I've had the opportunity to start working on, I'm about to have a chapter published with one of my supervisors, Dr. Suresh Shahid, on neurodiversity and sexual reproductive health in women because they are a forgotten generation. So it's very interesting that my mental health interest automatically moved towards neurodiversity. And it's easier to talk about neurodiversity right now in businesses than mental health. So there's doors
mm,
opening for that where the
mm,
mental health doors are still a little bit harder to push through.
mm.
And on a practical level in my own teaching, where the teaching is going is in my acute interest in extensive knowledge in data analytics and AI governance. So I have sort of these two areas. One is research, and then the other is very practical based, where I'm finding that my gifts are being utilized there. So there's sort of two things happening at once.
Wonderful. Donna, thank you so much for sharing your PhD insights and giving HR leaders at multinational enterprises a roadmap to protect their most valuable assets. We wish you all the very best.
Oh, thank you so much, David. And again, it was just an honor. I've watched many of your YouTube presentations, and I just thank you. It was an honor to be invited.